Hello, welcome. I'm Professor Yossi Meckelberg, and I'm an Associate Fellow of the MENA program here at Chatham House. It is my privilege to welcome you all to this latest webinar, which is part of the Chatham House series on Israeli-Palestinian conflict, in which today we have the good fortune to have with us three prominent observers, analysts of Israeli politics and foreign relations, to provide us some interesting insights. And we'll concentrate today is how is the current world changing Israeli politics. And I will introduce our distinguished speakers in a minute. Let me start with some housekeeping matters before we dive into our rather complex topic. First, the discussion is on the record and being recorded. I would like to encourage you to tweet using hashtag #CHEvents, Chatham House Events, and the handle @Chatham House. And please submit as many questions as you like using the Q&A box that will appear at the bottom of the Zoom feed, which after our initial discussion, I will ask some of your questions. Depends on the time that we'll have our panel. Let me start by saying, you know, it is the 96th day since of the war. And first, it started by the horrific terrorist attack by Hamas that claimed the lives of approximately 1,200 Israelis, and taking more than 130 people hostage. I mean, more than 130 are still in Gaza as hostage. And this was followed by Israeli massive retaliation, which, according to the health ministry in Gaza, killed more than 23,000 Palestinians, most of them non-combatants, and also landed Israel with charges in the ICJ. Moreover, I think we are also facing the threat of this war spreading to other fronts in the region, opening the door for other rivalries and enmities to surface. However, today we like to concentrate mainly on how this has affected and will continue to affect the Israeli society and politics, both domestically and internationally. These issues are, of course, a massive challenge to try and unpack, but we have these three distinguished speakers, and let me introduce them in alphabetical order. First, Dr. Thabet Aburas, co-executive director of the Abraham Initiative, has a long association in leading position in Israeli civil society and academia. After 6 years of serving on the Abraham Initiative's international board, Dr. Thabet Aburas joined as a co-CEO in 2014. The Abraham Initiative is a Jewish Israel and Palestinian organization that advances social inclusion and equal rights for Israel's Palestinian citizens by influencing public policy, shaping public opinion, and demonstrating practical models for a shared society. Dr. Aburas has authored many publications, media articles on Israel-Arab-Jewish relations. Second, Dr. Nimrod Goren, Senior Fellow for Israeli Affairs and Middle East Institute. Dr. Goren is the president and founder of Mitvim, the Israeli Institute for Regional Foreign Policies, co-founder of Diplomats, the Council for Mediterranean Diplomacy, and co-chair of regional initiatives at President Isaac Herzog Israeli Climate Forum. Nimrod holds PhD in Middle Eastern Studies from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and was a Hubert Humphrey Fellow at Syracuse University. Last but not least, Merav Zonenfeld, Senior Analyst on Israel-Palestine in the International Crisis Group. Merav joined the ICG in 2021 as a Senior Analyst on Israel-Palestine. She's responsible for covering Israeli domestic politics, relation with the Palestinians, and regional conflict settings and policies. Merav is an Israeli-American journalist and commentator who has covered Israeli politics and US foreign policy for over a decade. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and many other publications. And she is also founding editor of Plus 972 magazine and contributor to Jewish Currents. She has an MA in nationalism studies. So welcome, three of you. Let me start with posing you almost the impossible task, but I think if anyone can, you can, of taking in 4 or 5 minutes and outlined what for you are the most important changes that you have observed that are taking right now place in Israel society since October 7, and where, in your opinion, it leads in terms of domestic developments, but also in relations with Palestinians and far beyond. So in a way, I'm asking you a bit of reflection, what happened so far, and trying to gazing a bit into the crystal ball. And let me suggest, let's start with you, Meirav. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Yossi. Happy to be here with all these panelists that I admire, and thank you to Chatham House. So there's really a lot that I could unpack here. I guess I'll try to stay focused on one notion, which I think is that October 7th, which has now become this ominous and horrifying date, was in many ways one of the most significant moments in the Israeli-Palestinian crisis. And I would say we are now in the most kind of determining inflection point of Israel-Palestine relations since 1948. But at the same time, what happened on October 7th was not a break from everything we know about the situation in Israel-Palestine. It was actually a continuation, I think, of a lot of the trends and the policies and the behaviors and the threats and the risks that we've been dealing with really from the very, very beginning. So, you know, we had a far-right government in place with some of the, most destructive policies on Palestinians, the highest death toll, even before October 7th. We had unprecedented mass protests against the far-right judicial reforms before October 7th. And so it's important to look at all the processes that were happening, also the crisis in general and Netanyahu's leadership, the fact that he lost legitimacy, the fact that the security establishment was warning him and telling the world that they don't trust him on security. And this was all happening before October 7th. And then October 7th happens, and you have a very, very clear failure, across the military and political echelon, but first and foremost with Netanyahu. And then now you're seeing that on the one hand, which is very, very, I think, rare for most conflicts in most countries, where you have absolutely no legitimacy for the political leadership, but full legitimacy for the war that's being waged. And so I think there's a lot of interesting paradoxes and gaps in how things are happening. So for example, Israel started this, obviously the attack was something that still is causing enormous grief and trauma and is an open-ended grief and trauma that we're still discovering the scope of it. And at the same time, sorry, somebody just walked into the room. So you had this reaction where we have to get rid of Hamas. And the position has been also that we always wanted to get rid of Hamas. We just didn't have the public support to do so, and now we have it. And in essence, the Israeli leadership has promised to get rid of Hamas, which is something that I think is likely unachievable for various reasons that we can get into, but my personal opinion is that it has promised something that it cannot make good on. And we're 3 months into this, and I think we're seeing that a lot of the reality of that is coming into focus. And so the question is, how are Israelis going to respond to the fact that they are being promised one thing, but are seeing something very different? And I think this is most acute in the hostage crisis and in the fact that there are like 200,000 Israelis displaced in 2 different areas of the country, in the north and the south, who have no idea when they can go back home. And this is an unprecedented event in Israeli history. And the Israeli leadership has promised to dismantle Hamas and to push Hezbollah back up. And until that happens, those people are not going to want to go back. And so Israel has almost put on itself a limit and a restriction that makes it even more difficult to return to any kind of normalcy. And so I think what we're seeing is a culmination of 20 years of a rightward shift, of the death of the peace process, of the notion that only through unilateral military action can we achieve things. And I think, unfortunately, the immediate effect on that is that Israelis are hunkering down and saying we have to, there's a lot of support for the war. But I think more and more we're starting to see cracks, and we're starting to understand that as things will progress, Israelis will realize that there needs to be an alternative, and that even those in the opposition are not offering that alternative. And unfortunately, I'm very concerned that this war could drag on for months and months and months if that alternative is not presented both externally by foreign actors, primarily the US, but also internally by politicians who provide a real clear alternative that involves a political solution. I'll stop there and we can get into more.
Yeah. Well, yesterday I met a group of teachers in one of the high schools of Tel Aviv, and I found the teachers are actually less confident, less democratic, less protective of human rights. The unprecedented distribution of arms within the Israeli society is really scaring now. Israel it's already militarized society. We find Israel today is more even militarized. There is no real gatekeeper against the violation of human rights in Israel. All of this in advance to say that the war has had an extreme impact on the Israeli society. The Israeli society is still in trauma. 3 months after 3 months since the atrocity of 7th of October, we see that the Israelis still actually in trauma. And the amazing thing that nothing happened before the October 7th, and they are concentrating that day, and nothing should happen after that. I believe that the Israelis already know that they lost the war with those war. Actually, they didn't achieve the objects, the direct object at least, of toppling Hamas and returning the Israeli kidnapped Israelis actually. And I believe there is indirect objects that also that some of the Israelis, some of the politicians did think about it, and they didn't reach them, mentally scratch the Palestinian not to repeat such atrocity. I think we are far from that. I believe that many Israelis believe, also Palestinians believe, that Hamas won the war already from the first day. And I think there are some Israeli officials and military officers and the minister in the government believe that if we can just push for a little transfer of Gaza from Gaza Strip to Sinai Peninsula will be great. Also, they failed to do that. So far, none of those achievable, actually. And I think that those major conceptions had fallen. Managing the conflict rather than solving it, it's already fallen. Also, it's impossible to continue with normalization with some Arab regimes, dictatorship regimes. It's not going to happen by with overpassing the Palestinian issues. And I believe that also Hamas, Palestinians, and the Arab world have all deterred. It's another fallen conceptions. I'm not sure that the Arabs are really deterred. I'm saying that I think we should, all Israelis here, we should look to what happened after condemning that, okay, the atrocities, and say that clearly nothing really can justify such atrocity of 7th October, but also nothing can really justify the killing of thousands of civilians in Gaza. Even 7th October event cannot really justify that, okay? I believe that it's a wake-up call for the Israeli establishment to reconsider their political views, and for those in the Israeli public who are less sensitive to atrocities committed by Israelis in Gaza. We should, I believe, try to suggest something now. It's either now or never. There is a big opportunity, okay, from this crisis that Israel should adopt. It's not Israel. I think the international community, the friends of Israel, should pressure Israel to give some hope to Palestinians and to go to, I will say that a peace summit that can guarantee Palestinian independent and sovereign state alongside Israel. I believe we lack a real leadership in Israel and among Palestinians. We think we should think about changing leadership in both countries, in both nations, in Palestine and also in Israel. I believe that changing the political leadership in Israel is imminent. Now Netanyahu is actually only 15% of the Israeli public believe that Netanyahu is the most desirable prime minister, and we see that this fall really is going down. So it's imminent to change political leadership. The problem that Gantz will build a unity government in the day after that consists of the Likud parties. Yes, we see personal change with the Israeli leadership, but we are not going to see a real paradigm change, and this is the real problem. A unitary coalition that will include right-wing parties will keep the status quo as it is right now, will not take us to peace. And also, I would like to suggest, as I'm an Arab Palestinian citizen of the State of Israel, that the political parties of Israel in the left and in the center have to change their strategy of advancing a political partnership with the Arab citizens, with Arab political parties here. I believe the Arab citizens, who consist of 20% of the total population, they are actually political peace force that should be utilized. Alienate the Arab community, alienate the Arab political parties is bad for the left and the center of Israelis. If we want to see change, a real change, we should adopt political partnership with the Arab political parties. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saber. It raises a lot of issues, but I'm sure there will be questions, and keep putting your question in the Q&A. Nimrod.
Thank you, Yossi. It's a pleasure being here, and I will follow up on what Tabet said, because we are reaching a phase in which the need for domestic political transition in Israel, from an Israeli perspective, is becoming vital to both achieving whatever is possible within the war objectives, but to also achieve any progress towards better relation with the Palestinians and any advancement towards a two-state solution. Because I think Merav spoke about it as well. There is a general mainstream consensus, let's say, in Israel about the objectives of the war as has been spelled out, meaning making sure that Hamas is not governing Gaza anymore, making sure that Hamas cannot pose a military threat on Israel, and making sure that the Israeli hostages are released. And those three goals, and we can debate, which of those is more likely and which is less and under which conditions. Definitely Israel needs to have more time and freedom of action in order to reach whatever it can on those. But that time and freedom of action that was basically bought throughout the last 3 months by willing to accommodate all kinds of international demands, especially Americans, on the humanitarian issue, at least to a certain extent, like the threshold of the humanitarian aid, this is becoming not the case anymore. And we see it with the American visits and the American terminology, the need for Israel to engage in strategic planning on the day after, being willing to see progress towards a two-state solution, is becoming a prerequisite for continued American support for what Israel needs in order to achieve the gains. So the domestic political card is becoming very, very important, and we see it also playing out in the international relations. And you can see more and more statements coming, let's say, from Washington, criticizing the composition of the government and making the case that Netanyahu will eventually have to choose which will be his composition, whether with the moderates or the more extremists. What Washington cannot say, but Israelis can, is that it doesn't matter what Netanyahu chooses. Israel needs a new type of leadership. Okay, and there's need to be a change in the leadership of Israel in order to see any constructive progress out of the war and towards peace. And in that regard, we see an interesting process happening within the Israeli political system in which, as was mentioned before, the levels of support, of trust in Netanyahu is dropping. It has been the case before October 7th, as we saw the judicial overhaul that was largely unpopular within the Israeli public, but definitely after October 7th, Netanyahu is being held accountable for the policies that he led before, the concepts on the Palestinian issue that basically failed, the conduct on the day itself, and his conduct as prime minister ever since. It doesn't seem to be giving Israelis what they expect from their leadership, but rather is very much keen on political survival. So you see a public opinion that is shifting away from Netanyahu, but in a quite a paradoxical way, going both ways. So in terms of ideology and ideas, you see people going more to the right wing, becoming skeptical of progress towards peace, skeptical of the Palestinians, not to the extreme right perhaps, but more to the right. But in terms of projected electoral behavior, you see people moving towards the center and preferring Benny Gantz as possibly the next prime minister. Now, this is not a sustainable situation, probably, and you will most likely see an emergence of some grouping within the Israeli right that challenges Netanyahu. So this will still be at play, but definitely the political process in Israel that is currently on low key, because there are many who say, well, it's not really legitimate to talk politics at a time of war, but when the war in Gaza is shifting to a phase which is of lesser intensity, and the internal disputes happening after the Supreme Court ruling also are coming back to the forefront, whenever Gantz and his party are leaving the emergency war cabinet, then the political debate will come loose, and I think that's where we'll see this debate happening. Now, it won't lead to a change that totally changes Israel from right to left, but it may lead to another government like the Bennett-Lapid style that may be very diverse ideology, but focusing more on good governance and enabling regional relations to move a bit forward, and enabling some of the international things that should be done on the Israeli-Palestinian issue that does not involve Israel directly, like the reuniting of the West Bank and Gaza, bringing back the Palestinian Authority to rule the Gaza Strip as well, spelling out incentive for peace, spelling out a diplomatic horizon. All of that could be happening more likely with a different Israeli government, playing also on what we see already going on between Israel and the Arab state. With all the criticism that is being voiced on Israeli actions from the region, we also see the relative resilience of Israel-Arab relations, even in spite of the war, and we can elaborate on that later. So I will stop here for now.
Thank you very much. You set the scene perfectly to, I think, for a lot of the issues that we can discuss in the next 40 minutes. I would like to start with you, Mira, because you're talking about a legitimate war, but not a legitimate government or leadership. But then there is another issue of legitimacy, the legitimacy of the way the war is conducted, which has another aspect to this. How do you think this actually can be all square? And if this is the case, is there also, in many ways, a case here to say that, because the argument you don't change government during war, but if the government is not seen by the people as legitimate to fight a war, and then there are questions about the means that it's conducted, is there a case for calling election or changing within the current Knesset, the composition of the coalition?
Well, let's be clear. I think Israelis think that the war not only is legitimate, but I don't think that they're questioning the means being used in this war. And in fact, we've heard from many public officials a lot of incendiary and genocidal language that is reflective of a base and a country that isn't questioning the means to the end of this war. So the illegitimacy of the means is really coming from Palestinians and from the US and from other actors. And on that point, I just want to say that I think a big part of the reason for that is twofold, or they're connected. One is the media in Israel. The mainstream media in Israel does not show what's happening in Gaza. It does not interview Palestinians in any kind of basis really at all, not just in Gaza, but in general. And they provide a very, the military reporters are essentially just, representing the IDF. There's no critical perspective at all. And it's kind of like maybe obvious to some of us, but it really has a huge effect on the ability for public discourse here to question not whether or not Hamas should be, let's say we agree Hamas shouldn't be in Gaza, but how do you achieve that end? That's not being questioned at all. And the second is this notion of just the dehumanization of Palestinians, which we're now seeing the culmination of, but to an extent that it's not just dehumanizing them on a human level, but on a political level, that they are not a people that deserve to have political engagement of any level. And I think October 7th was a direct expression of the fact that when you think that you can just forget about 2 million people over there that are an hour away from where I am, that somehow the problem will go away. So it's not just dehumanizing, it's also coming back to hurt you because you've basically said you don't need to deal with it, and then it comes back. But as far as I guess you're asking whether the legitimacy of the leadership is going to change during this war. I think Nimrod mentioned that it could be that now in this, this war is an endless war right now. There's no end in sight. There's no clear victory being defined. There's no clear end being defined. And I think to answer a question that I think I saw, Netanyahu clearly has an interest in prolonging this war for his own political survival. But there are also things that are going to start happening, and they're already happening, which is calls for elections, which is fatigue by the reservists, which is all kinds of things that we don't know exactly where they're going to go. But I do believe that in 2024, something will have to give. And I think, as Nimrod also mentioned, and Tabit, it's absolutely clear that this government cannot reach a solution to this war. That this government, it's not, when they say there's no day after, there's no strategy, there's no end game, there is a day after, there is a strategy. It's to continue to fight and to have no Palestinian state or solution ever. And so that is something that Israelis are not challenging enough, clearly, but that the rest of the world is clearly seeing, and that the US knows, but is still not willing to do anything about for its own reasons. And so these things are coming to be very, very clear. And my hope is that Israelis will demand a change in the leadership. Now, how that happens, I don't know. When it will happen, I don't know. But the problem is also that even if you do get Netanyahu out, that's not enough. People are challenging Netanyahu. They're not challenging the policies and the views that Netanyahu represents, which are not, exclusive to Netanyahu. And Netanyahu and the far right have already become one gush, one bloc. So Gantz is not in that bloc, but he's also not providing an alternative that I think will actually provide a different scenario. Now he could move, he could change, but we are stuck. I think as long as there's no alternative in political leadership and no external pressure, then we're stuck in this endless war right now.
Thanks, Mirav. If I can ask you, Thabit, in the light of what Mirav said, and also what Nimrod said earlier, how do you see the Arab-Israeli community react to that? Because Nimrod talks about, that actually the relations, the Arab-Jewish relations within Israel is proved to be robust during the war, but what developments you see? We're talking about the day after, but maybe we should talk about the months and years after as a result of something of this magnitude. But how do you see where the Arab Israelis will see the community going to which direction?
Well, let's remember that we are a minority within Israel. We have dual identity. We are Palestinian. The majority of us, Palestinian citizens of the state of Israel. We are Israelis, but also we are Palestinians. We are actually benefiting from the peace between our country, our people the most, and we really the big loser of any war. Just imagine that the rockets, Hamas rockets, cannot distinguish between us and between Jewish people inside Israel. Some of the Arab people, especially Bedouins, were among the kidnapped and the killed people in the 7th of October. And they are, and now the big thing that we have relatives in Gaza. Half of my family live in the refugee camps of Jabalia and Beit Lahia, and 21 people already killed from my extended family from my mom's side. Just we are suffering of this war more, just like twice, I would like to say. Okay, so we really would like to see a ceasefire and to reach some conclusion to this war. And I'm saying I don't believe that there is a military. From the first day, I said that there is no military solution to the issue of Gaza. Just let us remember, the Israelis, occupied Gaza since 1956, 11 times. We're repeating that again and again. And I think still there are some Israelis wanted to see Gaza disappearing in the Mediterranean. And still Gaza is there. I remember that some of my relatives really lost in the Mediterranean. They are looking for freedom, just to look for a place where to work. And Egypt and Israel prevented from Gazans to leave Gaza before October 7th, okay? Now, we are here citizens of the state of Israel. We are looking for integration within the state of Israel. We are citizens. We are discriminated against. There are a series of discriminatory law. The big one is, just to remind all of us, nation-state law that really discriminate us and see us as second-class or third-class citizens. Israel is behaving like a Jewish supremacy regime from our point of view. And the nation-state law, the first article, if you read the first article, talking about only the Jews, okay, have the sovereignty for the whole territory between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River. I think it's actually eliminating the desire of the Palestinian to have own self-determination and the right for independent and sovereign state within, alongside Israel, even that. So what we would like to see is changing Israeli discourse, political discourse. The Arab citizen, while they want to strive for equality in Israel, there is no law of equality in Israel yet, okay? In the same time, we would like to be part of any change toward peace for our people and for our country.
Thank you, Thabit. Let me just express that I'm sorry to hear about your loss in this war. Nimrod, on this note, and of course some of the questions that are asked, because talking about opportunity, talking about alternative that was mentioned, is the two-state solution still a possibility? And if it's a possibility, do you think what modality you can envisage of a two-state solution that we can look forward to?
It's definitely not around the corner, the two-state solution, and there is a discourse going on for years on whether it's still alive or dead or feasible or not. I think for many Israelis and for many Palestinians, that's the best solution that we can identify currently as the immediate step to resolve the conflict. There are all kinds of a discussion about next steps after the two-state solution, maybe for confederation and other types of cooperation. But reaching a two-state solution, I think for pro-peace Israelis, or for most of them, that's the goal. And even if we think this is difficult to do, this is the responsibility or what we need to step up to try and do as much as possible. And therefore, if we try to look at the current situation and see how it can move towards a two-state solution, first we look and get inspired from previous crises in Israel regional relations and how they were transformed into better relations. And of course, the key example that people go back is the Yom Kippur War, 73, and then several years later, the peace with Egypt. So that's kind of an inspiring story from the past that shows that a very bad reality could be transformed. Of course, that transformation went through political leadership change in Israel at the time. But then again, the question is who is taking action? Assuming that the Israeli political timeline that we discussed before is a long one, it won't happen in the coming months. Even if Netanyahu is ousted, even if a more moderate, more open towards peace government is being put in place, that is not in line with the political timeline of the US and the EU. Both are going towards elections. So when we hear the very positive language coming, let's say, from Brussels about a real opportunity, and now or never, now is the time to advance a two-state solution, and when we hear American administration talking about that, when we check that vis-a-vis the political reality in terms of timelines of change in Israel and Palestine, it's not very likely that we will see this big peace summit and the big breakthrough. So then the question of what should be done and what are the gradual steps toward that. And again, first, we need to have a unified Palestinian leadership that controls both the West Bank and Gaza, which is capable, which is moderate, which is legitimate. We definitely need a change within Israel. We have to take a look at the multinational efforts to advance peace that are taking place that began before October 7th. One channel was the American-Saudi channel of normalization with the Saudis, between Israelis and the Saudis. This channel that is still in the making, we heard about it this week, that there are still debates about that, should be clearly linked to progress towards a two-state solution, unlike what we saw in previous normalization agreements. Okay, the second channel is what the EU led starting in September, what is called the Peace Day effort, which is a multinational attempt to create an incentive package to be presented to both Israelis and Palestinians by the international community to show tangible benefits of peace. Okay, so those processes have value if they reach their end goal, whether it's linking normalization to Israeli-Palestinian peacemaking, and the international community beginning by putting a very credible, or clear at least, diplomatic horizon for a two-state solution, creating a mechanism in which international countries can work together instead of that quartet that is in place for 20 years but is not functioning anymore. What is the international mechanism? And once there is an international debate, putting forth what should be the parameters and the benefits of a potential possible peace deal, that will help empower at least those in Israeli and Palestinian societies that support peace to have the sense that their arguments can be a bit stronger and could be backed a bit more effectively by the international community and the regional countries. But it will take time.
Thabit, Mirav, on this issue of two-state solution, views?
Yes, I believe that the international community today is accepting the two-state solution as the ultimate solution, but we should think out of the box. It's not enough today to talk about two-state solution. We are here and they are there. I'm asking where I am. Am I here or there? Okay, I think I am here and I am there too with my people, the Palestinians. So I believe that the two states and one homeland, to consider the whole area as a one homeland for Arabs, Palestinians, and for Jewish people. Okay, if there are some Jewish people who would like to live under Palestinian democratic state, I think we should allow that. Okay, and I think we should find a just solution for the issue of Palestinian refugees. And we should think about Jerusalem as a united city for all, for Israelis and for Palestinians. So yes, two-state solution as to promote the rights of self-determination for two people. In the same time, we should find a way how to keep the homeland as a one homeland for all of the people.
Thank you. Merav, this one?
I mean, as bad as the situation is and as far off as it seems that there could be, I do think that what happened now exposes, it really exposes how much unilateral military force by Israel doesn't get the job done ultimately. That's not something that necessarily the Israeli public feels, but I see that very clearly. And when people say to me, how are you going to make peace with Hamas? It's like, well, look at Egypt and Jordan. Those have proven empirically to be the most effective ways to reach stability in the Middle East. So, whether it's two states or one homeland, that doesn't really matter to me. But at this point, I think the reason we got here primarily, I mean, there's a huge crisis in Palestinian leadership. But there's also a crisis in Israeli leadership, and the international community has allowed Israel to reach a point of total impunity for its actions. And I think a lot of the reason we got here is because of that. So I actually think that the US role here is critical, and that it could really change the way things look. And it's not doing that. And so in some ways, you even have a bigger opportunity now to actually put together the normalization deal with Saudi Arabia, together with the interests that many have against Iran and its axis, to kind of de-escalate all of it by putting in what would have to be major Israeli concessions on the Palestinian issue. And so that would force something to start to move. And then Israelis amongst themselves will have to deal with the repercussions of what that means. But they've never had to do that until now, or at least not in a very, very long time. So that would have to happen. And I unfortunately believe that it's only going to happen through external pressure.
Thank you. Let me take two questions from the audience by Kieran Omar that ask about the power of Otzma Yehudit, if you think it's actually increases, and to follow that, Alistair Baird ask if there is a new coalition which excludes Ben Gvir and Smotrich, what would be the implication for them if the political power outside government to be seriously disruptive to any new government, in particular in relation to the changes likely to be required to settlements on the West Bank. So who would like to take this one?
I believe that Netanyahu normalized Ben Gvir's ideology, put him in the government, and knows how bad vulnerability is during wartime. We see the incitement of Ben Gvir and Smotrich, and they are pushing Netanyahu to, I will use that word, atrocities in Gaza. And I believe that what we are witnessing within the Israeli society, all of the Israeli society is moving to the right, but the right, the extreme right, maybe will get some more votes from the right itself. We don't see a kind of polarization left and right in Israel. We see the center is moving a little bit to the right, but the center understand more and more that there is a need for for such a solution. And I don't think the Israeli political map really ready for a solution without the help, I would say, of the Americans, of the international community, of the friends of Israel. Yes, the Israeli community, the Israeli society is passing through very tough times. We thought that over time, the issue of the fear discourse that came from the Shoah, the Holocaust 80, 90 years ago is still there. But I think it's what happened for many Israelis. This is what I am hearing. In the 7th of October, it's a little Shoah. So the fear discourse within Israeli, it's really very, very strong nowadays. But we have to distinguish it from politics of fear. Netanyahu and Ben Gvir and Smotrich are really using a lot of politics of fear from the Arabs, from the Palestinians. We didn't talk anything about what's going on in the West Bank. We should pay attention to what's going on in the West Bank, not in Gaza. From the 7th of October, over 350, maybe around 400 Palestinians already killed. A lot of them because of the pushing of Smotrich and Ben Gvir in the government, but also because of the extreme settlers who are chasing Palestinians in the Area C and others. So all in all, I would like to say that we should consider, hopefully the political map should consider find ways to exclude extreme people in the political map within Israeli society. I know it's fantasy maybe right now, but just to remind all of us, just a few years ago, really people consider to just to throw away from the political map extreme people from the right and from the left.
Nimrod?
Yes, I think the good part of the story is that when we look at the public opinion polls, it's not as if the extreme right parties are on the rise. Okay, this is not happening now. What is happening, and that's problematic, is that those who support those parties that of course are becoming more legitimate within the younger population are dramatically empowered. Okay, those people that support Ben Gvir, that support Smotrich, because of the prominent position that those two have gotten within the government and all that comes with it, whether it's responsibilities and budget and legislation, those guys have much more power within the society. And we see it on a daily basis happening on the streets of Israel, very things that are very disruptive or very negative, I think, to how mainstream Israelis view it. And also the understanding that those extremist statements and policies throughout the war have caused Israel lots of trouble. Okay, and probably you know or are aware of all those lists of Israeli ministers and members of Knesset who came out with all kind of really radical, really extreme statements that will be cited this week in Hague, by the way. So if the Israeli society understands that those extremists are causing damage to national interests, not because it's a left or right issue, then in the next election cycle you may see this contained, but if it is contained, it goes to other very clear right-wing ideological politicians that are just less extreme. Okay, so it will be perhaps going to this new right-wing party that may emerge. So there is a give and take over here, but we also need to take into account that it's not only Ben Gvir and Smotrich. Many of these voices are within Likud as of today. And ministers from Likud are voicing the most absurd statements. So it's not only about containing the far right, it's about making sure that what we see in the polls today, that Likud is cut, let's say, by almost a half, that will be the case the day when Israelis go to vote.
Let's assume that we have, Israel is having elections in 6 months' time. And actually the public moves to the center. In practical terms, what would it mean? What will it mean in terms of policies? Maybe start with you, Meirav, because you spoke about the alternative. So if there is a center, right, there is a kind of asking you go again to gauge into your crystal ball. So there is a Gantz-led government. What are the changes that you can envisage?
I mean, I don't like to predict, but also I would not subscribe to those definitions. I don't think Gantz is center. I think Gantz is on the right, and I think it's just everything has moved. You could call it center right, you could call it soft right, I don't know, but he's not a centrist. Even Yair Lapid is not a centrist as far as I'm concerned. Put to the test, in the past, Lapid has not proven to be a centrist, but that's also because the bar has moved so far. But I mean, I do think that a government without the far right parties, with Gantz, would would change a bit the positioning of Israel. The problem is that I'm not sure that it would not just provide what the Bennett-Lapid government did, which, by the way, did some of the most right-wing actions of an Israeli government when they outlawed Palestinian civil rights organizations. I'm not sure that a Gantz government would do that. It might just provide a fig leaf. It might provide a pause. So I'm not actually convinced that it would do that. I think my analysis is that you have a far right and a right, and then you have a left that has no political power really, and the center is lost. And it's looking for political representation that it doesn't have. And part of the reason is because you don't have anything being offered, and that what the left is offering, people aren't buying. So it would take a lot longer, I think, in Israeli politics for there to be a real shift that would make a difference in the Israel-Palestine conflict.
Beton Nimrod, you would like to comment on this?
Well, maybe we look to the political map in Israel a little bit different. Still, I think there are some people who really center in terms of the issue of democracy, but this is not enough, I guess. I believe that we should judge people also in the issue of peace. And unfortunately, right now, and this is one big failure of the protest in Israel, that they're chanting all the time, democracy, democracy, and then they refuse to connect the issue to the peace. So they didn't educate the Israeli public for such an important issue for the Israeli public. So I believe that the coming government that should be led, by the way, I believe with Gantz will lead the coming government. It must be a unity government. There is no other way, because of the Israelis now. They are chanting everywhere, we will win together, we will do things together, and they need this. And I think the issue of the war, actually, at least, the atrocity, Hamas atrocity, became a centripetal force binding Jewish people together, and they will continue this discourse. The question, what the Americans will do. I wish to see President Biden taking this ticket to in his campaign in the coming election in the United States, say, I'm going to give hope to the Israelis and the Palestinians and to achieve peace, just peace, two-state solution. So we are heavily dependent on the international community, the help of the Americans and others. We cannot rely on the political map in Israel. It's not going to change a lot. Still, people, because of fear, and some of it genuine fear, yes, we cannot really say, well, Israelis will make peace. No, they need a lot of help from outside of the country.
Yossi, if I may add a few words on that. I think first it's very important that if we go back to the modality of the Bennett-Lapid government as like the best case scenario in Israeli politics at the moment, unfortunately, we need to make sure that such a government will also include the Israeli left. And the Israeli left currently in the parliament has only 4 seats, if you look at Meretz and Labor, and to make sure that this process we are now entering of political renewal also includes the rebuilding of a center-left, left-wing Zionist Israeli party that is capable of getting into the Knesset with as much votes as possible. And we see processes going on with both within Labor that is going for new leadership, and maybe a merger with Meretz, and maybe the entry into politics of all kind of those who emerged for leadership position within society as part of the broad democracy protest. So that's something that I think will be a challenge or a goal for us to make sure that is happening. And if a government like that is taking office eventually, I think you will see an empowerment of the professional bureaucratic service, especially the Foreign Service, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. That was one of the dramatic changes that you saw in the Bennett-Lapid government, that foreign policy was not anymore the personal domain of the Prime Minister, but was rather dealt with in a more professional way, enabling Israel, even though it didn't make progress with the Palestinians, to make progress with Jordan, which is a very important relationship that is now in crisis, with Turkey, that is a relationship that is now in crisis, with those Arab states that were willing to engage, with the EU, even with the convening of the Association Council. I think there's a lot that could be done. Even if a government is making only limited progress on the Palestinian issue, it would create a totally different international environment for Israel to be also pushed and encouraged to make more progress towards peace.
Thank you. Let me take a question from Karina Litwak. She asked, Yuval Harari has spoken repeatedly about the fact that parties on both sides are too traumatized at the moment to think beyond their immediate pain or see the other side's pain, and therefore that others need to take charge of leading efforts towards peace and reconciliation. And if he is right, who do you think should play such a role? I think we can divide it into kind of, or see the impact of the trauma on both sides. And again, if there is a trauma that paralyzes the political and social processes, who can actually help out with that?
I mean, I'm not sure what the person means by it, like a third party in Israel-Palestine, or I don't know, but I mean, the one thing I'll say is that there is trauma, and that this war is creating generations and layers of more trauma. And I'm not convinced that what Israel is doing is going to lead to the eradication of Hamas so much as the birth of a lot worse, newer things. But there is trauma, but there's also weaponization of trauma, and there's also an occupier and an occupied. And so the trauma, for a second, we need to put aside and realize that there's a long-standing occupation that needs to end. And I don't know who's gonna take responsibility for that, but that to me is at the core of the issue here.
I would think, Yossi, that first we look into homegrown solutions. How do you rebuild the peace camps, and also empower those that are already believing in peace? And that, I think, goes through the resumption of people-to-people engagement, interaction between Israelis and Palestinians. In the past, when we spoke about people-to-people, we spoke about broadening the peace camp. I think now it's much less ambitious than that. It's just keeping intact those who still have hope for peace and are willing to act for peace, so they have constructive interactions with people on the other side. I think our generations that met consecutively Palestinians or Israelis in different locations around the world, now this is not something that most Israelis have a chance to do. Many Israelis, even those who support peace in principle, have never met Palestinians for substantive dialogue. I think that's something that should be prioritized after the war, to enable those who are eager to promote peace or open to that idea to meet each other, to be in touch with each other. We see the Americans having increased funding for that allocated. I'm not sure how effective it's being implemented through, but this is a priority also for other actors. And a word on the third party. Of course, the US will remain important, but you need to look also at the Mediterranean aspect. And Thabet, you mentioned the Mediterranean several times in different contexts. But if we look at the Mediterranean as a sub-region in which Israelis and Palestinians are managing to cooperate on different levels than they do on the Middle Eastern level, whether it's a union for the Mediterranean, in which Israel and Palestine, as Palestine, are equal members, or the East Med Gaza Forum, where you see the same. So that kind of a hybrid sub-region that enables all kind of softer cooperations on vital issues, whether it's energy and climate and water, that can be a space that will be empowered in order to bring the people together into some sort of a cooperative mindset, let's say, more than they have now.
Thank you.
I can add to that. I think there is enough power still in the Israeli society. Yes, Israeli society is in a crisis, but still there are a lot of power within Israeli society. When I look to the civic society in Israel, is really proud of very vibrant, very active society, and trying actually doing a lot of the work of the government right now in this crisis. So, but we cannot really rely only in the civic society. I believe that if we can get rid of Netanyahu personally, honestly, personally, who legitimized the extreme right wing within Israel, things will start to change within Israel. Now, all we need is to give the Palestinians some hope. I believe giving Palestinians some hope and legitimize Palestinians as partners, this will help to reach out to the Arab countries. Right now, Israel is actually promoting peace. Okay, no, it's not a peace with Saudi Arabia. Promoting relation with dictatorship regimes. What's important is to see that the Arab masses, okay, really think about the Israeli masses, the Israelis here. We see that this is deals with regimes important for Israel, important for Saudi, just to confront Iran, for example. But I think that the fact that we are jumping on Palestinians, jumping on the Palestinian Authority, okay, that it's the real representative of Palestinians is really bad. We should give respect Palestinians, show that, improve their own lives, and give them hope. I think change will start. We are not asking for immediate change, dramatical change. No, it's not gonna be, but gradual change can happen, and there is enough power within the Israeli society to make this change.
Thank you. We have only a few minutes, so I'll just try to bring together a few questions and move a little bit to the kind of how the domestic scene corresponds with the international one, because there are some questions about the role of the UN. How is it seen from an Israeli point of view? Can the US still play the role of a credible broker of peace? And also, if we can kind of also look a bit the regional picture in few words, because as the border with Lebanon is eating up, what do you see which direction this goes? So, Merav, would you like to start?
I mean, there's no way I can do that in 2 minutes, but or 1 minute.
No, take more than 1 minute.
No, I mean, there's only 3 minutes left. I mean, I think I've said this several times in different ways, but we are at, an inflection point. It's one of the worst periods, but it's also an opportunity. And those are like the light at the end of the tunnel is still there. At some point, we're going to have to cease the fire. I wish it would happen already. At some point, we're going to have to negotiate different deals to assert security. And so I mean, with Hezbollah, it's a whole other story, and it's hard to get into here. But I do think that nobody is interested in a serious escalation, and that there is room there as well for alternatives. And I don't think that there's a military solution there either. So, and I think the price is way too high. So, I mean, you asked about the US. I'm not sure. There's too much there, so I don't know how to tackle it all.
One of the questions, I think, by John Paul Rosario is after the way that the United States is handling this crisis, this war, can it still be a credible peace war?
It can be, but it hasn't been, and it continues to not be. But it could be if it wanted to, but we're going into an election year, so I don't expect, if this was Biden's second term, I would say there's a lot of options to work with. Currently, I don't think so. And again, I think, the US has let Israel continue for 3 months with very little achievements to show. And it's trying to make Israel fight a more humane war, which is literally impossible in this situation because of the nature of the Gaza Strip. So it's hurting the US, it's hurting Israel, it's hurting Gaza. I don't see the upshot here. I'll let my other colleague do.
Thank you. Thabit.
Well, I believe that still we need the international community. We need the United Nations. We need all actually the international bodies. However, unfortunately, the Israeli media did educate over a long time the Israelis that those bodies are not important. It's rarely that you are hearing in Israel the international law, for example, and this kind of things. And this is the shocking thing right now, when Israel have to now to be and to try to struggle in the ICJ, okay? It's really a problem for Israelis. All of a sudden, Israeli minister that used to do and to say whatever they want. Second Nakba, for example, throw a bomb, nuclear bomb in Gaza and so forth. All of a sudden now, the government legal advisor asking those people are just to erase and to such statements, okay? So we should educate Israelis. I think we cannot, and Palestinians, yes, we cannot really progress within the international community, without the international bodies, including the UN.
On the United Nations, of course, the Israeli perspective is negative one now, but we need to remember what Nikolai Mladenov, when he was a special coordinator, managed to do, not only in terms of preventing previous wars in Gaza, but also in terms of the credibility that he got within the Israeli policymaking system. So it's not by definition that any UN envoy will be disregarded in Jerusalem. Of course, this government is a bit different, but there are examples of effective mediation, and that could be repeated. In terms of US credibility, I think, yes, the US could be a credible mediator. I don't think we have a menu of many other actors who can do that. We see the US now taking the lead on the planning of the day after. We see sustained American mediation between Israel and Lebanon, with Amos Hochstein doing that. So there's no other actors that are stepping in on that. Countries are willing to support the US in that, but are not taking the lead or not capable to take the lead. So we have to rely on the US. And in terms of the regional map, I think it's important to note how the Saudis and the Emiratis are stepping up their involvement on the Palestinian issue. From the Abraham Accords, we said, well, these countries are less inclined to be involved, but the assumption was that whenever there will be an opening for political change in the Palestinian Authority, those countries will have motivation to try and shape it to their needs. And I think this is happening in front of our eyes, plus the important role that Egypt is continuing to play, whether it's in mediation or hostage release and other issues. So those are the key actors. I think there is worry in Israel from the direction Jordan is going. Jordan, who used to be like a very moderate and important force, is now taking another approach, and it should be kind of brought back into the constructive diplomatic efforts that the international community is trying to lead.
Thank you very much. And sadly, we reached the end of the time allocated for us, and Merav just sent her thanks because she had to leave for another meeting. So thank you for such a thought-provoking conversation. And there are so many issues. I won't even try to summarize all what has been discussed here, but I think it sets a really good platform to continue to discuss this kind of issue, from the domestic to the regional to the international. Thank you, the audience, for so many great questions, and I apologize for not going through all of them. There were nearly 50 of them, so it was impossible. And my special thanks is to Dr. Thabet Aburas, to Nimrod Goren, and to Merav Zonsen for participating, and follow our future events on this issue and many other at Chetamar. Thank you very much for participating.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.